Okay, everybody. I appreciate the fact that you guys are watching this on video, so I'm going to try to make this short and sweet. It's very important that you understand the principles here. I don't have an ability to share my screen with you, so I'm going to have to kind of take the camera and point it at some documents so that you can actually see what I'm seeing and talking about. So this is going to get a little cumbersome for a few minutes, but that's all right. It's the way it works. Going back to the text, page 501 is where the text begins to discuss the whole issue of paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is vitally important to your success because without a paraphrase, you're going to be stuck with long quotes. And we know from yesterday's lecture that long quotes are not something that we want to work around. What we do want to do is we want to be able to kind of synthesize the author's ideas down. That's what a paraphrase does. A paraphrase takes the author's ideas, and you've heard it a million times. You use your own words, you use your own sentence structure to make that point. Well, I'm here to tell you that the text says the same thing. I'm going to pull this text off of here. I'm going to point it down, and I'm going to show you, right, that right here in the middle of that page, right, it talks about, it says, if you simply change a few words in a passage, you have not adequately restated it. You may be accused of plagiarism if the wording of your version follows the original too closely, even if you provide a page reference for the source. That is an important lesson for you to learn. And I need you to recognize that, because this issue of paraphrasing, like when I read your papers, and what any college professor or good college professor does, right, is they open up your documents that you're using through your references page, and they kind of read along with what you're doing, with what the documents are saying, so we can make sure that what you're saying about the research is accurate. So what I'm expecting you to do, again, this is the whole thing about paraphrasing, just as it was with direct quoting. Put yourself in a position to describe the source. Don't try to reproduce it. When you get too close to it, that's how you get accused, of plagiarism. I have a great example of this in a document. I'm going to grab this camera again. And I want you to just pay attention to this, what the document says is an acceptable and an unacceptable version of a paraphrase. So at the top of the document, or top of the paraphrase, is the original. And I only have to look at 2 sentences on this in order to make any sense of it and to explain what I'm talking about here. And I'm having a tough time with this thing focusing, so I'm just going to hope that this thing can get a little bit better here in a second. All right, so still having problems focusing. All right. In the first original passage, it talks about some idea of what it means for personal space, right? And it says different countries have different ideas about exactly how close is close. That's the very first sentence. And down here on this unacceptable paraphrase part, it says the underlined words are plagiarized. And I'm here to tell you that yes, the underlined words are plagiarized, and that is an easy way for us to identify plagiarism in that situation. But let me tell you that that's what Turnitin.com is going to pick up. Right? Turnitin.com is going to pick up those words because they're exactly from the original. But this is paraphrased for a different reason. It's paraphrased because the word, unfortunately, in the first sentence becomes regrettably. The words different countries have different ideas about become different nations think differently about. I'm not even at the point where I've got the word for word transition out of the original. I've got a plagiarism problem because this person is just using synonyms to make it look like they're not plagiarizing. So this is plagiarism not only because those words are taken directly, but because the sentence or the paraphrase is following sentence by sentence, line by line, and all it's doing is providing some synonyms. So what we want to be in the position of doing is to own that information ourselves. We don't want to be going sentence by sentence, line by line. We want to put ourselves in the position of describing and explaining things and showing how the sources relate to our arguments, instead of just trying to find a way to reproduce the author's text so that we can chalk up a source in our references page. So I am going to give you 6 steps to an effective paraphrase. And these are the 6 most important things you can start internalizing for the writing of this paper. So these 6 steps, if you follow these 6 steps, you can pretty much assure yourself that you're not going to commit any type of plagiarism. All right, step number 1, make sure that you read the passage, you read the article, you understand the article, you have, if someone asked you a question about it, you would be able to discuss it in its entirety. And not that you have to know all the details about what it's doing, but essentially the details about how it contributes to your argument. So you should be able to read, understand it. That means you may have to read it a couple of times. You need to get familiar with that source. Step 2, get that source out of your line of sight. If it's in your line of sight, you are going to follow sentence by sentence, line by line, and you're going to, become guilty of plagiarism simply because you're not following the steps accurately. If you have the source in front of you, you are going to use it to write your paraphrase, and that's the critical step that many people, or that's the critical point that many people fail in, because they get too closely tied to the original. They follow line by line, sentence by sentence, and they throw a bunch of synonyms in. That is not acceptable. So step 1 is to know your material. Step 2 is to get it out of your line of sight before you begin writing. So, and this takes us to step 3. You can't begin to write unless you really know what you're trying to accomplish. So as you're getting that source out of your line of sight, jot down a few notes. Talk about, write yourself some reminders about what the important factors are in this source that you really want to, to highlight in your presentation of those ideas, and then write your passage. So read it and understand it. Get it out of your line of sight, jot down a few notes to yourself about the highlights that you want to produce, and then write your passage. Those are the first 3 steps of the process. The second 3 steps then are kind of the checks and balances. After you write the passage and you know that you've got a paraphrased version of what you have read, in other words, put yourself in a position to describe the source, and you should be in a very good position to avoid plagiarism. So you tell me what the author says, you tell me what their argument is, you kind of show the relationship that it has to your argument. That's what you should be doing here. But more importantly now, you've got to go back through and make sure that you aren't committing plagiarism. So I would say step 4 would be go back. We all have reading comprehension skills, right? What we read, we retain, and sometimes we retain words and phrases. So you may find that in your paraphrase or in your note-taking, you took language directly from the source without even knowing it. So ignorance is no excuse from the law. So you should go back and look at what you wrote as a paraphrase and make sure that no words and phrases show up as being taken directly from the source. If they do show up, you've got 2 choices. You can either edit them out and find a way to rephrase it, or you can just put those words in direct quotes because they're taken directly out of the source. Make sure you manage it with the ellipses and the brackets and anything else that you have to do. Step 5, once you go through and look at all the sources, or look at all the language in there to make sure you didn't take any language directly, step 5 is to go through and make sure that what you wrote about the source, your description, your summary, your synthesis of of that argument, make sure that that correctly reflects what the author intended, making sure that you didn't go and write something that the author didn't say, right? And this is what my point was about the managing the quotes. We found that people commit plagiarism because they use direct quotes and they inaccurately reflect the author's words. So, well, it's easier to inaccurately reflect the author's ideas with a paraphrase. So if you don't have a good control over that subject matter, if you don't know that source inside and out well enough to write about it effectively, you may run the risk of plagiarism because you're going to tell me that the author said something and the author didn't say it. That's plagiarism. So backing up, step 4, check for language. Step 5, check for originality of the idea. In other words, are you being true to the author's cause? And then step 6, get your citations in there. In other words, you're going to introduce that source and you're going to be having conversations about that source For every sentence that you borrow, that source, that information derives from a page number, right? So as you introduce that source, you don't have to keep putting the author's name in there. You say, according to Jones in his article, and then at the end of those sentences that are being paraphrased, I need to see a parenthetic reference, right? The parentheses, a page number, the end of parentheses, and then your period on the outside, right? The period goes on the outside of the parentheses because the parentheses are part of that sentence. That is an important message, right? The period's on the outside of the parentheses because the citation belongs to that sentence only. A lot of people think that they could write a paragraph of information and then just stick a page number at the bottom of that paragraph where there's several sentences in there. That is not true. That's not a way to write a research paper. Every sentence that you write, if it's borrowed, has to clearly reflect that it's been borrowed. So if you're writing a summary of the source and it's coming from certain pages, you need to put those page numbers in there. You need to make it clear and obvious that the sentences that you're writing are about the source that you just introduced. And if it's clear and obvious, you don't have to keep putting those page numbers in there. But if you can't just simply introduce a source, or you can't just simply begin writing and then stick a parenthetic reference at the end of your paragraph and expect that parenthetic reference to cover every sentence before that, that doesn't work. So my point to you here today is to make sure that you abide by that simple principle that every sentence needs to, if you're borrowing it, needs to reflect that source, either through the language that you're using by introducing that author or by inserting that page number in order to show that this information came from that source, and that's a continuation of that same process that you started before. All right? So 6 steps. Read it and understand it. Make sure you have a good working knowledge of the source. Get it out of your line of sight, jot down a few of your notes, and then write your passage. Go back over and look for language. Go back over and look to make sure that the ideas are accurate, and make sure you get your citations in there to represent that all this information comes from a source and that you are giving credit to the author who came up with those ideas. That is plagiarism avoided by using the paraphrase. If you've got questions about this, Monday's the day to ask that question. I can be flexible, but we can't waste too much time. You've got an opportunity now through the weekend to work on this paper. If you've got questions, you want to send me those questions over the weekend, I will gladly answer those questions over the weekend. But by Monday, you need to come in with a working draft of this paper. You need to be able to demonstrate to me that you can infuse the research into your argument and that you can associate those ideas of the authors in with your ideas so that you can blend those arguments together and try to fortify your own positions on these papers. I'm looking forward to working with you on this, but this is a tall task in a short amount of time. And once we're done here, we got to do it again with paper 5 and probably even a little bit of a shorter time period. So let's get this under control for Monday. Make sure that we can turn that paper in on Wednesday. We're moving forward from there. If you've got any questions, send them to me by email. Thanks, folks. We'll talk to you on Monday.